Muted.
Percent to store is the primary, excuse me, the primary report that we use on a weekly basis. And I was also going to go into a tiny bit of detail on kind of the next level step after that report that we use in the workflow. The second report is the credit card cashier name. We are lucky enough here to have our cardholder names still come through because of just kind of the smattering of data that we actually do get into our system. So we're able to use that. And then finally, the employee email summary, basically looking at customer email addresses that have also been used in employee transactions, and thus we can then tie them back to a associate. So jumping right into the first report, it's our cash refund percent to store. And basically what this is a weekly report. It runs automatically. For those of you that are familiar, we are obviously running a pretty old version of XBR here in our environment. But obviously, hopefully the concepts will translate. We send this out to our home office and our field associates, and actually one of the best things, or the most complimentary things that I've gotten about this report is the fact that our field and our regionals actually will trust the report. They understand it, they can read it, and they will work it. So I can actually send this to the field and have them work their people without me having to give them a whole bunch of extra information beyond this. So that's been one of the nicest things about it. The logic that I used to kind of build this report was that a cashier's sales activity, transactions and sales dollars, would be generally proportional to their other areas of ringing activity. So just to use round numbers, if a store has 100 total sales transactions and my cashier has 10, then the cashier has 10% of the store's sales transactions, and we would expect the other areas to be relatively close to that same 10%. And the analysis that I've done in our environment, about 3/4 of our associate base within the cash refund area, this holds true. So about right around 75% of them, they fall right within a tolerance of their sales activity, meaning that the rest are outliers basically, and they're kind of worth a little bit of a deeper dive. Another kind of fundamental concept that I used in building this report was that the most relevant peer group as far as identifying abnormal ringing totals is going to be a cashier's fellow peers within their store. I think most of us have probably done a situation where you pull up a store report and you look at it and it's ranked by sales, but it also shows refunds, and you can see someone immediately who happens to be 5th in sales but 1st in refunds, and that jumps off the page. So my kind of task when I was creating this report was, how do I get a report that shows everyone in the entire company but accurately compares them to just the people within their entire store? And so that's what I think we've achieved here, and kind of go through some of the columns here. Some of the information that we have, as you can see on the left side, is just kind of all your demographic info about the cashier. And then cashier sales and refund stats is your aggregate statistics on how much sales they've rung, how many refunds they've rung, what's their average, et cetera. And then the percentage figures are where it actually starts to get interesting, and that's kind of where some of the criteria are built off of, as far as what percent of this cashier's activity accounts for the total activity in the store, in both sales and in cash refunds. And then on the right side are the overall store sales and refund stats, which are the stats that I use to compare the cashier to the store. So as you can see, it's basically just kind of it's a little small, but I broke it out on the next slide. It's basically just what percent of the store sales does my cashier ring, and then what percentage of the store's cash refunds does my cashier ring. It also looks at average, because we've had one pretty successful regional who looks at if a cashier's cash refund average is higher than the store's average refund. That's also can be indicative of something that's worth a closer look, and so that's why I included that as well, and it's also included in the criteria of the report. So basically I broke out the top line of that so that you can see some of the numbers, and so they make a little more sense. So you can see it's just basic math here. Sales divided into store sales equals to 22.92%. It's pretty basic. So if I've rung 22.9% of the store's sales transactions, but 39% of the store's refund transactions, that's interesting. From the amount perspective, if I've rung 24% of the store's sales dollars, but 61% of the store's cash refund dollars, that's even more interesting. So You can kind of see how this report sort of bubbles someone out of their store, but allows me to look at the entire company at one time on one report. The criteria for the auto-run report is basically how I'm trying to remove false positives and also bubble the important people up to the highest part of the report. So the difference between the counts percentages has got to be more than 4 percentage points. So and it's just a percentage point basis. Difference between amount is 9%, and again, that's just achieved based on benchmarking, so what's normal in our environment. And then the associate's average refund must be greater than the store average refund. So those are kind of all the ideas of throwing out the false positives of people who are in line with their own sales activity. And then the difference between the percent of store refund amount and store refund count cannot be greater than 35%. So basically what that's doing is saying that if I am at 39% of the count and 90% of the amount, it's kind of a crazy number, but just to make the example simpler, those numbers are indicative of someone who has just gotten an outlier, meaning like someone came in with a $300 refund, one isolated refund, and oftentimes those in our environment do not turn out to be the fraudulent refunds. We way more commonly will see the person who is doing the $20 here, $30 here, $40 here, $20 here, and it's more just kind of trying to stay under the radar, but indeed they end up bubbling up as a percentage of their store's activity. So that's kind of what the report is in our environment, and some of the concepts that are at work here are benchmarking normal activity. And so there are certain, obviously there are ways to kind of make these a little bit more flexible, but for us in the systems that we have at our disposal, the easiest way was to kind of figure out what looks normal, and that's how we arrived at our kind of 4 and 9% and the averages and things like that. But also fine-tuning the exceptions as it's worked. So if I'm finding that someone calls me and says, hey, there was this person that I'm worried about, but they weren't on the report, I'll look and see, were they thrown out because their average wasn't high enough, or their count and their amount were too far apart, or something like that. Why didn't they appear, or why did they appear when we're not worried about them? And so that's kind of goes on to the next point that I have of controlling for false positives without eliminating true positives. And it just goes back to not thinking that the report is always going to be right. Maybe something's changed in the environment. Maybe they're now ringing more refunds. Maybe they're now ringing a higher percentage of refunds for a real reason. Obviously the whole report is kind of built around using sales activity as a measuring stick for the rest of the ringing activity. And so if this holds, then we would be able to potentially use the same kind of analysis for looking at discounts. Discounts should be the same percentage of the sales activity. Post void should be the same percentage of sales activity. And then also finally just kind of using a peer group to be able to compare the cashier to, so that it makes the most sense. Because if I'm going to run a report and rank it based on the entire company, that may be too wide a group to be able to effectively bubble someone out of that. So using the store and the peers within the store as the benchmark for unusual activity, for me, has been pretty darn successful. And so next, I decided, in the spirit of kind of a lot of the statistical analysis and things that I have been exposed to as a part of this group, and just recently, because I come from more of kind of the pure, like the AP, asset protection, exception reporting side, and never really got into the more advanced stuff until like the last year or so. So I decided to see if I could kind of approximate this report using regression. And as it turned out, it actually worked out pretty well. Using the same fundamental concept that the sales activity should be indicative of the cash refund activity, and that we should be comparing people within their store, I basically put in cash refund dollars as my response variable, put in sales count. I tried amount as well, but they were correlated enough that I only needed count, and then used store as a categorical predictor, so that people could be estimated based on what they're doing within their individual store. So I got a not earth-shattering but still relevant model, pulled the residuals out of it to see who was the most different from what the model said that they should be, and then you can kind of see what the ranking turned out to be at the bottom. The report that I run a top 40 each week. And so I looked at the top 10 cashiers that the regression told me about, and 9 out of the 10 cashiers also appeared on the same report. So it seemed like a pretty close approximation without having the same level of detail as I get into with the exception report, but being able to kind of recreate this using a different statistical sort of method. I thought it was kind of a neat crossover between pure POS exception reporting and statistical analysis, and it was also kind of back to that same point of if I've got some other set of data, maybe I don't have a great report written in my exception reporting system, maybe to be able to do the SQL on the back end would be too taxing for the server that I have or the system that I'm working within. Maybe I can just pull some basic aggregates, counts and amounts, and then run some analysis in Excel or in some other sort of statistical package and try to get similar or equally as effective results. So that was just kind of a fun little example. From a workflow perspective, this is kind of the next report that we use. So once someone is identified as interesting off of the first report, then we want to kind of get a one-stop shop to be able to say, do these individual transactions look interesting enough? Do they look like fraud or do they not? And that's what this report was created for. And so you can see very quickly here the actual transaction information over on the left, so date, time, amount, all that different kind of stuff. In the center section here is kind of the most important information about each of the individual transactions. And when I tell people how to read this report, I generally say kind of look for a lot of messy in the middle area here around the OP lookup fail, same-day return, same-day original time. The more things that appear in here, the more interesting it is. So what the OP lookup fail is, the original purchase lookup. Is the system able to find an original purchase transaction that matches what was entered into this return? Same-day return, meaning that it was purchased and returned the same day, and if it was, what was the time of the original transaction so I can figure out what the turnaround was, how quickly did the cashier ring the return. And then rang OP also is whether the same cashier that rang the original purchase rang the return. The next column over is whether the original transaction had cash tender. Next one is whether the original purchase came from a different store. That's not always an indicator that it's not fraudulent, but fewer of those transactions are fraudulent in our environment than are not. The original purchase e-receipt. So if we were finding that the original purchase had an e-receipt sent, and that's kind of a scheme that the person is using, maybe they're sending all the original receipts to the one email address and then accessing them to be able to do the returns. And then finally on the top line, the number of original purchase transactions that were used. Again, a lot of these columns also are kind of there to tell me whether I think something is interesting, because if there wasn't cash and the OP wasn't found, then that makes sense. But it's also not a good thing. We should be finding original purchase transactions for all these cash returns. And then the next line down here is it normally is appended to the right side of this report, and it has all the customer information that's entered into the return. Obviously, I just deleted that, so we don't have to worry about information getting out there. But you can see the name, address, city, state, and then also I placed the phone numbers from the return transaction and from the original purchase transaction next to each other, along with the customer emails from the return transaction and the original purchase transaction, to be able to just kind of at a glance compare, are they the same, do they match? Oftentimes we would prefer that they do to make it less suspicious, but there's obviously always reasons one way or the other. So the concepts that I got with this report were, number one, getting a workflow, so getting a next step, because oftentimes we get a great report that says, hey, this cashier has some unusual looking activity. Okay, cool. Are the transactions themselves suspicious? How do I figure that out? And so this is kind of that next step to tell people, go here, see what you see. It's one line per transaction. It's an at-a-glance, one-stop shop that, in general, once you know how to read the report, if you pull this up, you'll be able to say, okay, I'm worried about this, or I'm not so worried, maybe do a couple minutes of research and be done. So that's kind of the cash portion there. The next report here is our credit card cashier name report. So the way that we have our data come through, we still get the cardholder name when someone uses a payment card in our environment. So we're lucky there, and just basic comparison of the text field between that cardholder name and the cashier who rang the transaction obviously gives me a ton of information. The number of last name matches, So you see credit card with similar last name. Obviously, that's a start. Somebody has my last name, Bethune, and they have a similar last name. That's probably indicative of something interesting. If they have a last name Jones and their similar last name, that's probably not as interesting. But then that's why I also count the number of first name matches to say if Sally Jones has 3 transactions ringing Sally Jones as the cardholder, that is then interesting to me. And for us, obviously, that's a policy violation to be ringing someone's own credit card. So that's at least a start at a policy issue for us when someone appears on this report. As you can tell, this is a report from a long time ago, but there are quite a few people that show up on there, so we don't generally go gunning after those just for the policy violations. But once you start to get into seeing the returns, those are the ones that get interesting. And so obviously we see one cashier down here who has a return transaction, first name and last name match, and it's a negative balance. So I'm interested. Someone has rung a credit card with their exact first and last name and has rung a return and does not have any purchases during this date range. So again, automatically interested in a transaction like that. But also something like up here where it's a sale and a return with a $0 balance, because we've oftentimes caught things like sales manipulation. So buying something right before the end of the month, returning it shortly after the end of the month because they wanted to make their bonus, they wanted to make their sales goal. Another thing is that in the recent past we've become gold on conversion in the stores. So if someone is, then you'll see 8 sale transactions, 8 return transactions, or 8 sale transactions on the same day, and each one of them is one nail polish. So why would you not combine those all? Well, if I add 8 more transactions at the end of the night, then maybe I'll make my conversion number, and then we'll be in good shape after that. So that's kind of how we use the report. It's obviously a very quality report for us, but given the different way data comes across in everybody's environment, something like this is not always possible, but the concepts behind it are kind of what data do I have, what can I see in my transactions, and what can I see on my associates, how much of my associate data is loaded in, and what benefit is there to being able to link particular associates to types of transactions or sets of behaviors. There's all kinds of different instances in which these types of transactions might be interesting. What if we just have address data and we're entering customer address and into a return and that matches my associate address? Now that's interesting. Or if there's an order in store for an online and all of my ship tos are going to an associate address. So there's different layers to this, even if it's not necessarily the cardholder on a credit card. And then kind of the final thing is that, again, based on behaviors, so using a combination of factors like last name match, first name match, credit card in the transaction, based on the behaviors, is there an opportunity to create a report that can identify fraud the first time it happens? We have a couple of reports like that. This is one of them. There have been a couple of instances that I can think of over the past couple of years in which we have caught someone crediting their own credit card fraudulently the first time that it happened. And oftentimes it's not that easy and it can't always be done, but when it can, it's nice to be able to have a report that can catch the really big, really obvious stuff very quickly. So that's one of the things that this has done a nice job of for us. The last report that I wanted to talk about here is the employee email summary. And so for us, this report came about due to the fact that we went live with e-receipts a year or two ago, and we have the inevitable associate who sent a bunch of transaction information to her own email address and then started using that transaction information to do fake returns. So obviously putting this report together to say, okay, by email address, excuse me, how many times has each one of these kinds of things occurred? And so to appear on the report, the email has to have been used within the last 30 days, has to have at least 5 total transactions, has to be at least 1 employee transaction. The thinking there is if it's been used in an employee purchase, there's a decent chance that it's either the employee's email address itself or it's known enough to the employee that they were willing to put it into an employee transaction, which means that they may have access to it. They may be able to get at any e-receipt information that's sent to it. So as you can, again, we're a little small here, but you can see a number of different stores it's been used in. Obviously, many of these, if it's the same associate, it's only going to be used in one store. Number of different cashiers that have entered that email address, number of employee transactions, You can see non-employee transactions, total transactions, all that different kinds of things. But then importantly here, number of e-receipts that have been sent to that particular email address. And you can see here, I'm not sure why anyone would even want, fraud or no fraud, would even want 166 different transactions worth of information sent to their email address, unless they're just not monitoring it, and so they don't have to worry about going in and deleting it all. But obviously, this gives us a really good indication of stuff that can potentially be interesting. I will tell you, a lot of these email addresses I've researched and found there's no fraud. It's just the falsification of I'm gold on a certain customer information capture percentage. I don't want to get in trouble or whatever it happens to be, and so I'm just falsifying the information so that I can get my information capture percentage up. But I mean, you can read across and see the kind of the different things that we've added up here. The concept behind it is that this is an email report specifically, but I have a bunch of reports that are constructed in much the same way, where we have some sort of piece of data on the left side. So a name or a phone number. You could see the cashier credit card name was a very similar report too. The loyalty number, credit card account, employee ID, whatever it is on the left, and then just counts of interesting things on the right, just to identify, what would be valuable here, what kinds of behaviors or sets of circumstances would we want to track for an email address or a cashier name or whatever it happens to be. Another thing that goes as far as like kind of a fundamental thing here is what is available in the data as far as flags and things that I can count. What might I have to create? So, for instance, the e-receipt flag exists in the system. It's already available at the header level, and I was able to just count that based on the number of transactions. Something like a non-receipted return that is at a detail level and it's not a flag, so I had to kind of create that, but it was in there. So can I look at non-receipted returns? Not automatically, but we can make it happen. So that's kind of the basics behind this report, how we use it, and what kind of the ideas were behind that. So those are my reports. That's kind of the information that I had to share with you guys today. Contact info is here in case you would ever want to get a hold of me. Please feel free. Any questions, comments, anything like that. I always love to talk about this stuff, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And then also, for right now, open up to any questions, comments, discussion, anything you found interesting, thought was weird. Go for it.
Hey Scott, this is Kyle. I thought it was very well done. We're working on very similar things here at Bloomingdale's, where we're looking at non-proof of purchase returns. And I've recently developed some reporting here, which is really just a series of pivot tables, which allows us to send this out to all of our 30 stores and kind of check out the associates that are having the top amount of non-proof of purchase returns. And this has really helped us pick off a lot of low-hanging fruit, where we see that we found a few different associates in collusion cases, and then we were also to identify some of our bad customers through repeated use of non-proof of purchase returns, as well as looking at the ID that they provided. Some of the customers were providing up to 15 different IDs. And I don't know if this would fit into your realm as well, but we see a lot of return fraud getting converted to some of our easy gift cards. So what a person will do will take a $200 to $400 item, do a non-received return, and since our return program is so generous here, we'll be like, okay, we'll just give you a credit or a gift card for this, and then they'll turn around and buy some merchandise. And that's how we identified some of our associate collusion as well, where they may not agree with these people making a non-proof of purchase return if it affects their commission. If they can buy a pair of shoes or whatnot in their same department, we've seen a lot of associate activity just kind of letting this slip by because it indirectly benefits them or directly benefits them. And we also look at things at top terminals for non-received returns. So we've been able to basically isolate our problematic registers, and we found that some of the people like to just go to certain associates and certain registers, and we've been harping on a set of about 3 stores here, really giving their whole AP team a pretty big headache just by providing this information. But I think it's really something, fraud analytics like you're providing, fraud analytics that we're providing here are really, really necessary, just because I think one of the clearest and easiest ways to catch the bad guys is just by looking at data. You could monitor a camera all day long, and I'm sure I could spend that time much better in the data world here and start picking apart different people. So I'd like to also encourage the rest of the group here to kind of participate in what analytics that you're working on here and how that's fit into your world of AP.
Yeah, Kyle, I'll jump in really quick before that. I appreciate all that info. That's good stuff. It's interesting because even though the environment's different, obviously, different fleet size, department store versus specialty, there's still a lot of crossover concepts that are, good to look at. The thing you mentioned about merchandise credits, funny, we just had a similar kind of thing. So non-receipted returns, it doesn't just have to be cash. Sometimes they'll just load gift cards, and then if they're unintelligent enough, they'll just use them in their employee purchases. So it's all about that. And then as far as the commissions and things like that, I learned fairly quickly that anything that we or ops decides to incentivize cashiers on, we need to make some sort of reporting on our end about what we think the most likely ways that someone's going to take advantage of it. Because even if it's just, if it's a monetary, like where you're going to get a gift card if you win this contest, that's really that really runs the risk of you're incentivizing somebody to do something stupid. But sometimes even, like I was saying before with the email capture, customer information capture, it's just there's just goal percentages and they post it in the store. But it can be something as silly as, oh, well, my manager makes the people with the lowest percentage clean the bathroom, and I don't want to have to do that, so I put my dad's email in every time someone buys something. It's like, well, that is really silly, but it still happens. And then if they don't get caught doing that, then what is the next thing? Is there a logical leap that gets made of, well, if they're not looking at this, maybe they're not looking at something else? So that really great points.
I got a question here from the chat box from John from REI, which is, do you have any data or transaction information from online transactions? If so, what reports do you find helpful?
That is a good question. Most of the online fraud prevention that happens in our environment is that so Justice is a part of the Ascena retail group. So we have sister brands, Lane Bryant, Catherine's, Ann Taylor, Loft, Maurice's, forgetting someone, of course, as I always do. But there's all kinds of these brands underneath the corporate umbrella, and the corporate Ascena is the ones who has the team that manages most of the online fraud. At the same time, we did ask for our so a basic feed of our online transactions to be brought into our exception reporting environment. And the reason we did that is because none of our net negative reporting, so looking at a credit card account over the past 6 months, what's the net balance of this credit card account, none of that was working because they were all negative, because anything that had been returned off of an online purchase was showing as a negative. So we loaded a basic feed just to be able to bounce off, credit card. Again, we don't get very much credit card information, but if we have last foreign card holder, we can figure out that it was the same card. And then obviously, when we're looking at it from an external perspective, customers coming in doing any sort of abuse or non-receipted returns, things like that, sometimes it looks bad, but then it turns out that they have some sort of history in the online, and that's what they're bringing in. But the cashiers are either not trained or lazy or unable to figure out how to enter that original purchase information in. So it's good to be able to bounce, again, the credit card activity off of the online as well. So we don't get nearly as much detail as I would like, but it is enough to kind of give us an overall kind of a net.
And yeah, we do similar things here at Bloomingdale's. So we have reporting that will track a person's lifetime spend on both in stores and online. And a lot of the fraud cases that have been seeing kind of align with somebody making a purchase online, claiming that they didn't receive it, and then returning that item in the store. We've had a good amount of double dippers do this. So we just looked at their overall activity, and we aligned that with our defects report to find people that are claiming either non-receipt of item or item damage, or somebody that just really pops off the list as having just a little too many errors within their shipping life, and then we either send that person basically a cease letter of saying, hey, don't do business with us anymore, or if it's egregious enough, we'll pursue them legally. Are there any other questions here for today's webinar? There's a lot of good information here to be covered, and again, we'd always love to hear what you're doing in your own retail spaces. Going to get the creative juices flowing here.
Hey, Kyle, this is Adam Fulton with Cracker Barrel. How are you?
Mm-hmm. Good.
Hey, I had a quick question for the group. Good, for the broader group. You brought up a different avenue to look at fraud that I had not thought about before. Traditionally we look at stores, employees, or type of product first, but you had mentioned you guys must have a specific report where you just hone in on a particular register. So I'm curious if anybody else uses that type of report, and what is that uncovered for you guys? So, Kyle, what you were talking about, the register where you're seeing a lot of refund activity, was that a register in a high-risk store near an entrance, like a street entrance in New York City, or?
So I wasn't necessarily sure of where this register is. I believe it was near one of our entrances off the mall parking lot, and this wasn't necessarily to help us figure out who's doing bad things at the register, but we started talking to the people who typically man those registers, and then align that with the activity that we've been seeing to say, hey, we know this person's a bad customer. Next time they come in, flag them. We'll make sure we have a proper shot on this register so that we can positively ID them, and then send out a bolo and work with our partners over at Macy's ORC, as well as our ORCA groups in the area, and just basically use this as a bolo generating activity.
Right, so really kind of just to start reallocating some resources just to figure out what's going on, why that register is so hot, seeing so much activity.
Yep.
Okay.
Adam, this is Scott too. We don't have this in our environment, but the way I've heard people use that type of reporting as well is when you have mobile POS. So especially if it's a store that has fixed registers and somebody roaming around with an iPad, if there is a specific register number that the iPad always gets assigned to, is breaking that out into a separate report and saying, okay, what's going on in that register versus the other register? Are they getting the tender share that we expect, and things like that?
Okay. Well, good. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Anyone else with thoughts or questions?
Right. Thank you, Scott, for this excellent presentation. I hope everybody obtained something useful from this webinar. And like I mentioned, this webinar will be recorded, and I'll soon post this to the Knowledge Center. So if you ever need to wrap your head around it, feel free to consult this presentation anytime you want. So up next, on our next webinar, which will be the last one for this year. This will be on December 8th at our usual time, 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll be having Marie from Alta taking us through how she performs robbery analysis. So if robbery is a concern of yours, please stay tuned for that webinar. So to close it out, I want to thank everybody for your time to join us on today's webinar. I look forward to speaking with you on the next one, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, guys.